Ant-Man 3 just jumped to the front of the line in terms of most anticipated upcoming MCU film, with its announcement of Jonathan Majors being cast as potentially Kang the Conqueror. Those who know the character know just how big a deal this is. And although this isn't confirmed outright and should be taken with a grain of salt, if it turns out to be true, then more than likely Kang won't just be a one-off villain for Ant-Man and Wasp's third adventure, but rather could be the next big threat to the MCU and help usher in the Fantastic Four. So what is it about this character that can change the MCU forever and be the next Thanos-level threat? Let's get into it right now. Alright, so just who is this Kang the Conqueror guy and why is he such a big deal? Well, you should know that Kang the Conqueror isn't his real name. As Spider-Man would say, it's one of those made-up names. Originally, he was born Nathaniel Richards, yes, one of those Richards, as in descendant of Reed Richards, in the 30th century. His world was just a mess and plagued with violence and destruction. But Kang was able to bring peace the old-fashioned way, which of course means conquering the planet and wiping out his enemies. But this wasn't enough for Kang. He got his hands on a time machine and started to hop through time, hoping to really live up to his new Conqueror moniker by conquering a lot of different time periods. How did he do this? Well, the 30th century was a special time for humanity where they were able to enhance their own strength and speed. So think of him sort of like a Captain America level of speed and strength. So not ridiculously overpowered, but still a threat. But that's not the only thing Kang has going for him. He's also probably one of the smartest, most tactical villains the Avengers have ever faced. There's not a lot of problems Kang can't overcome. And if you add on to that how his time-traveling adventures have helped him accumulate super advanced armor and weaponry, and even at one point have the ability to summon any weapon throughout history to him automatically through the time stream, and you got yourself a pretty solid threat, don't you think? So yeah, you can see why the announcement of Kang potentially coming to the MCU is such a big deal. Jonathan Majors' casting brought with it the announcement that he will be the upcoming main villain for Ant-Man 3, but after everything I just told you, does that really sound like someone who should just be regulated to one movie, especially just an Ant-Man movie? No. I don't think anyone believes if Kang the Conqueror is in fact the villain of Ant-Man 3 that he'll be just another one-off villain. He's way too important for that. That's like if Guardians of the Galaxy introduced us to Thanos only to have Rocket plant a bomb in his chair and blow the Mad Titan up, ending his reign of terror in just that movie. It just wouldn't work. No, Kang is clearly being positioned to be a long-standing threat within the MCU. But what would that exactly look like, and what's the best way for Ant-Man 3 to introduce the villain to be a greater threat down the line? It feels like there's a few ways to do this. The first is by having Kang be a ramification of the time travel shenanigans the Avengers pulled in Endgame. One possible scenario is that in the 30th century, Kang discovers the method of which the Avengers used to go back in time and tweaks it for his own villainous purposes. That would make for an interesting villain overall, because then the Avengers would be indirectly responsible for him, and thus make the battle more compelling. But that does create one problem. Avengers Endgame really drove home the point that when you time travel and change the past, you're not really changing the past, but rather you create different timelines that splinter off and do their own thing. At least, that's the rule Endgame set up regarding time travel. Maybe that could change, because if they keep Kang a time-traveling villain, then he loses a lot of his menace if he isn't affecting our world's specific past, right? So maybe to show how smart Kang really is, maybe he could figure out how the Avengers time traveled, but then alter and enhance the method himself, so he's specifically able to alter his own past in the main universe's timeline. Again, that would be a way for them to get around the Endgame rules and establish him as a really smart threat. There's nothing like showing how smart someone is than by having them fix a problem our heroes didn't even consider. I call that the Shuri effect, because that's exactly what they did with Shuri in Infinity War as she worked to remove the Mind Stone from Vision's head. But let's be honest for a second. There was a lot of criticism and debate over the time travel stuff in Endgame. So does the MCU really want to revisit that? That just seems like more trouble than it's worth, especially since there's a much easier solution. Looking at the MCU's future slate of projects, you can obviously tell the multiverse is going to play a huge role going forward. The concept was teased in Spider-Man Far From Home with Mysterio. Rumors are growing that the Loki Disney Plus show will be the catalyst for bringing a new version of Mjolnir over from that universe to our main universe. And currently the last film in Phase 4 is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So yeah, the multiverse is gonna be a big deal. There's been extensive theories pointing to how the multiverse is going to be what brings the X-Men into the MCU. but it could also be used to introduce new threats like Kang. I know this is a departure from the comics, but I think there's a way to bring Kang into the MCU and make him from an alternate universe rather than just the future. And before that scene is too controversial, just remember that the MCU has taken liberties with all their major villains so far. Ultron in the comics was created by Dr. Hank Pym, not Tony Stark, and we never got to see Thanos' epic love story and courtship of death on screen, when that's an important part of his character in the comics. So having Kang be from an alternate dimension instead of the future isn't that crazy, and he can still be from the 30th century, just from an alternate universe in the 30th century. And instead of jumping through time, maybe his goal could be to jump through universes and conquer them all, just like he did with his own universe. One of the big things about Kang in the comics is that his jaunts through time have created different versions of himself that are a mixture of heroes and villains. You have his other identities like Immortus, Scarlet Centurion, and Pharaoh Rama-Tut. These versions of Kang tend to branch off on their own because of Kang's general selfish attitude toward the laws of time travel. He doesn't care about timelines or paradoxes or anything like that. So if Kang comes from an alternate universe, you can still have him interact with these versions of himself, but just have them all be in different universes that Kang visits. I think that's a fair compromise that honors the spirit of the comics and adapts it in a better way for the live-action MCU. It definitely sets up Kang as the next big threat that needs to be stopped, or else the entire multiverse could be in danger. But as I explain how Kang can be the next big MCU villain, we can't forget about one hero, AntMan. It's easy to look at this Kang announcement as huge news for the entire MCU. But what about the movie he's being introduced in? The casting news with Kang says that Jonathan Majors will be the main villain in Ant-Man and Wasp sequel, which means it's not going to be some post-credit tease. No, Kang has to have an active part in Ant-Man's story and see the hero face off against this guy. And wouldn't that be kind of funny if Ant-Man defeated him completely in his third movie? Kang has the ability to be just as big as a threat as Thanos and really reshape the entire MCU, and producers know this. Audiences are going to be expecting this, so if Ant-Man and the Wasp are able to defeat Kang in just one movie, then all of a sudden, they're the two most important heroes ever. I don't think that's going to happen, but it would be hilarious. But since Kang will potentially be in the Ant-Man movie, then maybe the multiverse isn't how the MCU will introduce the time-traveling baddie, because Ant-Man eats, drinks, and sleeps the quantum realm. And even though both Ant-Man movies and Endgame have really gone into detail about what the quantum realm is, it still feels like we've just scratched the surface on its potential. If Kang is being introduced in Ant-Man 3, then it's all but guaranteed it will be a result of the quantum realm. Maybe Kang has been stuck in the quantum realm like Janet was, and through Ant-Man's actions is released. Or maybe Ant-Man tries to do some time traveling of his own, but instead of going to the past, he goes to the future in order to not disrupt the timeline. Why would he go there? Let's spitball. What if Janet falls ill from some unknown disease thanks to her long time in the quantum realm, and the only cure might exist in the future? Scott and Hope know that time traveling is dangerous, but have no choice but to go into the future to find a cure. They succeed and end up in Kang's time, where they battle the villain and come out victorious. But when they go back, they inadvertently leave the door open for Kang to access the quantum realm and wreak havoc on the timeline. Something like that? I could see it. Overall though, it's super interesting that Kang might be in Ant-Man 3 at all. It continues the MCU's trend of really trying to make the Ant-Man franchise more popular. They're really fun movies, but it's the lowest grossing franchise, and Disney has really tried to push Ant-Man to the forefront. Be it having the quantum realm and Scott be the key to beating Thanos, or by the placement of his movies on the release schedule. They really have tried to make the Ant-Man movies can't-miss events. And now with this Kang announcement and how he could be the next big villain, Ant-Man 3 has become another can't-miss movie. Because there's even more to Kang than just his villain status. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that he's a potential descendant of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic. With Kang's introduction, there is a clear path for the MCU to reintroduce the Fantastic Four, and that's just a smart strategy. By making Kang the main villain of the franchise going forward, you have a very personal connection to the Fantastic Four, which means they'll be at the forefront of the epic battle that's sure to unfold and make Marvel's first family integral to the story. So wow, yeah, the MCU is going to change drastically in the future. And one of the keys to all of that is Ant-Man 3. Who would have thought that? How do you think Kang the Conqueror will factor into Ant-Man 3? Do you see him becoming the next big MCU villain? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more awesome MCU content like this. Thanks for watching Screen Rant. See you next time.